Welcome back to Cosmic and Body Horror. Join us on a journey through the pages of old, dusty horror pulp magazines. Before we begin, I invite you to pause for a moment and share in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time of day it is for you. The Citadel of Darkness, a complete novelette of a strange zodiac by Henry Kuttner, first published Strange Stories, August 1939. Black arts and necromancy flourish in ancient forests when a prince pits himself against astrological gods. Hearken, O king, while I tell of high dooms and valorous men in the dim mists of long past eons, aye, long and long ago, ere Nineveh and Tyre were born and ruled and crumbled to the dust. In the lusty youth of the world, imperial Gobi, cradle of mankind, was a land of beauty and of wonder and of black evil beyond imagination. And of imperial Gobi, mistress of the Asian seas, nothing now remains but a broken shard, a shattered stone that once crowned an obelisk. Nothing is left but a thin, high wailing in the wind, a crying that mourns for lost glories. Hearken again, O king, while I tell you of my vision and my dream, the tale of Sekhmet, the damned one. The sign of the mirror for 6 hours. The archer had lain dying in the great oak's shadow. The attackers had not troubled to strip him of his battered armor, poor stuff compared to their own forged mail glittering with brilliant gems. They had ridden off with their loot, leaving the wounded archer among the corpses of his companions. He had lost much blood, and now, staring into the afternoon dimness of the forest, he knew death was coming swiftly. Parched lips gaped as the man gasped for breath. Once more he tried to crawl to where a goatskin canteen lay upon the glossy, motionless flank of a fallen warhorse. And again he failed. Sighing, he relaxed his fevered cheek against the cool earth. Faintly a sound came to the archer's ears, the drumming of hoofs. Were the raiders returning? One hand gripped the bow that lay beside him. Weakly he strove to fit an arrow to the string. 2 horses cantered into view, a great grey charger and a dun mare. On the latter rode a tall, huge, muscled black man, his gargoylish face worried and anxious. The grey's rider seemed small beside the Nubian, but his strong frame was unwearied by hours in the saddle. Under yellow tousled hair was a hard young face, bronzed and eagle-eyed. He saw the shambles beneath the oak, reined in his steed. "By Shaitan," he snapped. "What devil's work is this?" The dying man's fingers let the bow fall. "Prince Rainer, water," he gasped. Rainer leaped to the ground, snatched a goatskin and held it to the archer's lips. "What's happened?" he asked presently. "Yeah, here is Delphia. They took her." "Ooh!" "A band of warriors took us by surprise. We were ambushed. We fought, but they were many. I saw them ride south with Delphia." The archer, of a sudden, looked oddly astonished. His hand reached out and gripped the bow that lay beside him. "Death comes," he whispered, and a shudder racked him. His jaw fell. He lay dead. Rainer stood up, a hard, cold anger in his eyes. He glanced up at the Nubian who had not dismounted. "We also ride south," he said shortly. "It was a pity we fell behind." "Eblik." "I don't think so," Ebik observed. "It was an act of providence that your horse should go lame yesterday. Had we been trapped with the others, we'd have died also." Rainer fingered his sword hilt. "Perhaps not. At any rate, we'll have our chance to cross blades with these marauding dogs. So I think, obey." Rainer snapped and vaulted to the saddle. He set spurs to the horse's flanks, galloped past the heap of bodies beneath the oak. "Here is a trail, and it leads south." Grunting his disapproval, the Nubian followed. "You may have been Prince of Sardopolis," he muttered, "but Sardopolis has fallen." That was true. They were many days' journey from the kingdom where Rainer had been born, and which was no longer a home for him. 3 people had fled from doomed Sardopolis, Rayner, his servant Eblick, and the girl Delphia, and in their flight they had been joined by a few other refugees. And now the last of the latter had been slain, here in unknown country near the Sea of Shadows that lay like a shining sapphire in Imperial Gobi. When Rayner's horse had gone lame the day before, he and Eblick had fallen behind for an hour that stretched into a far longer period, and now the archers were slain and Delphia herself a captive. The two rode swiftly, yet when night fell, they were still within the great forest that had loomed above them for days. Rayner paused in a little clearing. "We'll wait here till moonrise," he said. "It's black as the pit now." Dismounting, the prince stretched weary muscles. Eblick followed his example. There was a brook nearby, and he found water for the horses. That done, he squatted on his haunches, a grim black figure in the darkness. "The stars are out," he said at last in a muffled tone. Rayner, his back against a tree trunk, glanced up. "So they are, but it's not moonrise yet." The Nubian went on as though he had not heard. "These are strange stars. I've never seen them look thus before." "Eh?" The young prince stared. Against the jet curtain of night the stars glittered frostily, infinitely far away. "They look the same as always, Eblick." "But did they?" A little chill crept down Rayner's spine. Something cold and indefinably horrible seemed to reach down from the vast abyss of the sky, a breath of the unknown that brooded over this primeval wilderness. The same stars, yes, but why in this strange land were the stars dreadful? "You are a fool, Eblick," Rayner said shortly. "See to the horses." The Nubian shivered and stood up. "I wish we had never come into this black land," he murmured in an oddly subdued voice. "It is cold here. Too cold for midsummer." A low whisper came out of the dark. "Aye, it is cold. The gaze of the basilisk chills you." "Who's that?" Rayner snarled. He whirled, his sword bare in his hand. Eblick crouched, great hands flexing. Quatue laughter sounded. A shadow stepped from behind an oak trunk. A giant figure moved forward, indistinct in the gloom. "A friend, or at least no enemy." "Put up your blade, man. I have no quarrel with you." "No," Rayner growled. "Then why slink like a wolf in the dark?" I heard the noise of battle. I heard strange footsteps in the forest of Merak. These called me forth. A glimmer of wan, silvery light crept through the trees. The moon was rising. Its glow touched a great billow of white hair, shaggy, tufted eyebrows, a beard that rippled down upon the newcomer's breast. Little of the man's face could be seen. An aquiline beak of a nose jutted out, and somber dark eyes dwelt on Rayner. A coarse grey robe and sandals covered the frame of a giant. "Who are you?" "Gyar, they call me." "What talk is this of a basilisk?" Eblick asked softly. "Few can read the stars," Gyar said. "Yet those who can know the dwellers in the zodiac. Last night the sign of the archer was eclipsed by the fish of Ea, and this night the basilisk is in the ascendancy." The deep voice grew deeper still. Organ powerful, it rolled through the dark aisles of the forest. "7 signs hath the zodiac. The sign of the archer and the sign of the fish of Ea, the sign of the serpent and that of the mirror, the basilisk and the black flower and the sign of Tammuz, which may not be drawn. 7 signs, and the basilisk rules tonight." Meeting the brooding stare of those dark eyes, Rayner felt a nameless sense of unease. "My business is not with the stars," half angrily he said. "I seek men, not mirrors and serpents." The tufted eyebrows lifted. "Yet the stars may aid you, stranger, as they have aided me," Gyar rumbled. "As they have told me, for example, of a captive maid in Malric's castle." Rayner tensed. "Eh?" "Baron Malric rules these marshes. His men captured your wench, and, She is his prisoner now. How do I know this? Raynor snapped. Does that matter? I have certain powers which may aid you if you wish. This is sorcery, Prince, Eblik muttered. Best run your blade through his hairy gullet. Raynor hesitated, as though almost minded to obey. Gyar shrugged. Malric's castle is a strong one. His followers are many. You alone cannot save the girl. Let me aid you. Raynor's laugh was hotly scornful. You aid me, old man? How? Old? I am older than you think. Yet these oaks too are ancient, and they are strong with age. Let me tell you a secret. Malric fears the stars. He was born under the sign of the fish of Ea, which serves the sign of the black flower. I too was born under the sign of the fish of Ea, but to me has been given power to rule, not to serve. The Baron knows my power, and in my name you may free the girl. Eblik broke in. What would you gain by this? For a moment Gyar was silent. The cold wind ruffled his white beard and tugged at his grey robe. What would I gain? Perhaps vengeance. Perhaps Baron Malric is my enemy. What does that matter to you if I give you my aid? That should be enough. True, Raynor said, though this smacks of sorcery to me. However, he shrugged, Shaitan knows we need help. If Malric be as strong as you say, good. Gyar's somber eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He fumbled in his robe, brought out a small, glittering object. This amulet will be your weapon. Raynor took the thing and scrutinized it with interest. The amulet was perhaps as large as his palm, a disc of silvery metal on which figures were graven clockwise. 6 signs. The amulet bore an arrow and a fish, a serpent and a circle, a flower and a tiny dragon-like creature with a long tail and a row of spines on its back. In the amulet's center was a jewel, cloudy black, with a gleaming star point in its tenebrous heart. The sign of Tammuz, whispered Gyar, which may not be drawn. Yet by the star in the black opal ye may know him, Tammuz, Lord of the Zodiac. Raynor turned the object in his hand. On the amulet's back was a mirror. Disc Gyar said warningly, do not look too long in the steel. Through the sign of the mirror, the power of the basilisk is made manifest, and you may need that power. Show Malric the talisman. Order him in my name to free the girl. If he obeys, well, if he refuses, the deep voice sank to an ominous whisper. If he refuses, turn the amulet. Let him gaze into the sign of the mirror. Gyar's hand lifted. He pointed south. There is your road. The moon is up. Ride south. Raynor grunted, turned to his horse. Silently he vaulted to the saddle and turned the steed's head into the trail. Eblik was not far behind. Once Raynor turned to look over his shoulder. Gyar was still standing in the clearing, his shaggy head lifted, motionless as an image. The warlock stared up at the stars. Tuan, the sign of the basilisk, so Eblik and Prince Raynor came to the outlaw's castle, a great grey pile of stone towering above the gloomy forest. They came out of the woods and stood silent for a time, looking across a broad grassy meadow, beyond which the castle brooded like a crouching beast. Red flame of lamps and flambeaux glittered from the mullioned windows. In the gateway light glistened on armor. Follow, Raynor snapped and spurred forward. Across the sward they fled, and before the nodding guardsman had sprung to alertness, 2 muscular figures were almost upon him. Bearded lips opened in a shout that died unuttered. Gleaming steel thrust through a bare throat, slipped free, stained crimson. Choking on his own blood, the guard clawed at the gate and fell slowly, face down, to lie motionless in the moonlight. One guard, Raynor murmured. Baron Malric fears few enemies, it seems. Well, that will make our task the easier. Come." They went through the flagged courtyard and entered the castle itself. A bare sentry room of stone, with a great oak door in the far wall, a room stacked with weapons, sword and mace and iron warhook. Rayner hesitated and then slipped quietly to the door. It was not barred. He pushed it gently open and peered through the crack. Iblik saw his master's figure go tense. Rayner looked upon the castle's great hall. High-ceilinged, it stretched up to oak rafters blackened with smoke that crisscrossed like a spider's web far above. The room itself was vast. Rich furs and rugs covered the floor. A long T-shaped table stretched almost from wall to wall. Around it, laughing and shouting in vinous mirth as they fed, were the men of Maurik, his outlaw band. Bearded men, wolf-fierce, gnawing on mutton bones and swilling from great mugs of heady-spiced liquor. At the head of the board, on an ornate throne, sat the Baron himself, and he was truly a strange man to lord it over these lawless savages. For Maurik was slim and dark and smiling, with a gaily youthful face, and long hair that fell loosely about his slim shoulders. He wore a simple brown tunic, with loose baggy sleeves, and his hands were busy twirling a gilded filigreed chalice. He looked up as two burly outlaws entered, half dragging the slim form of a girl. It was Delphia. She still wore her dinted armor, and her ebony hair, unbound, fell in ringlets about her pale face. There was beauty in that face, wild and lawless beauty, and fire and strength in the jet eyes. She straightened and glared at Maurik. "Well," she snapped. "What new insult is this?" "Insult?" the Baron questioned, his voice calm and soft. "I intend none. Will you eat with us?" He motioned to a chair that stood vacant beside him. "I'd sooner eat with wild dogs," Delphia declared. And at her words a low, ominous growl rose from the outlaws. One man, a burly fellow with a cast in one eye and a white scar disfiguring his cheek, leaped up and hurried to the girl's side. There he turned to face Maurik. "Have I given you leave to rise, Gunther?" the Baron asked gently. War answered, the other growled an oath. "By Shaitan," he snarled. "You've kept me waiting long enough, Maurik. This wench is my own. I captured her, and I'll have her. If she eats with us, she sits beside me." "So?" Maurik's voice did not change. Ironic laughter gleamed in the dark eyes. "Perhaps you grow tired of my rule, Gunther. Perhaps you wish to sit in my throne, eh?" The outlaws watched, waiting. A hush hung over the long table. Involuntarily, Rayner's hand crept to his sword hilt. He sensed death in the air. Perhaps Gunther sensed it too. The white scar on his cheek grew livid. He roared an inarticulate oath and whipped out a great blade. Bellowing, he sprang at Maurik. The sword screamed through the air. The Baron scarcely seemed to move, so swift was his rising. Yet suddenly he stood facing Gunther, and his slim hand dipped into his loose sleeve and came out with a light glittering on bright metal. Swift as a snake striking was Maurik's cast, and a lean knife shot through the air and found its mark unerringly. Through eye and thin shell of bone and into soft living brain it sped. Gunther screamed hoarsely once, and his sword missed its target, digging instead into the wood of the table. The outlaw's body bent back like a drawn bow. Gunther clawed at his face, his nails ripping away skin and flesh in a death agony. And he fell, his mail ringing and clashing, to lie silent at Maurik's feet. The Baron seated himself, sighing. Once more his fingers toyed with the gilded chalice. Seemingly he ignored the shout of approbation that thundered up from the outlaws. But after a moment he glanced up at Delphia. He gestured, and the two guards dragged her forward. Watching at the door, Rayner decided that it was time to act. Madness, perhaps, walking into a den of armed enemies. But the prince had changed his opinion. he had developed a queer, inexplicable confidence in Gyar's talisman. He found the disc in his belt, cupped it in his palm, and, with a word to Eblik, kicked open the door and stepped into the hall. 10 steps he took before he was discovered. 10 steps with the Nubian at his heels, great battle-axe ready. Then the wolves saw him and sprang up, shouting. Simultaneously Mulric called an order. His voice penetrated knife-keen through the tumult, and silence fell. The Baron sat motionless, a little frown between his eyes, watching the two interlopers. "Well," he demanded, "who are you?" And he cast a swift glance at Delphia, whose slight start had been betraying. "My name matters little," Rayner said. "I bring you a message from a certain Gyarred Gyar." A repressed whisper shuddered through the outlaws. There was fear in it, and bitter hatred. "What is this message?" Mulric demanded. "That you free this girl?" The Baron's youthful face was bland. "Is that all?" he asked. Rayner was conscious of a feeling of disappointment. He had expected some other reaction. What? He did not know. But Mulric's calm passivity baffled him. The Baron waited. When no answer came, he made a quick gesture. And up from the board leaped armed men shouting, blades bared. They poured down upon Rayner and on Eblik, crouching behind him, gargoyle face twisted in battle lust. So this was what came of Warlock's promises. Rayner grinned bitterly, whipped out his sword, and remembered the talisman. What had Gyar said? If he refuses, turn the amulet. Let him gaze into the sign of the mirror. The foremost man was almost upon him as Rayner flung up his hand, the talisman cupped within it. From the mirror darted a ray of light, needle-thin, blindingly brilliant. It struck full in the outlaw's face. It probed deep, deep. Instantly, a mask of stark, frightful horror replaced the look of savagery. The man halted, stood frozen and motionless as a statue, his eyes like those of a tortured animal. Like a soundless whisper in Rayner's brain came the memory of Gyar's words. The gaze of the basilisk chills you. And now from the mirror in the talisman, pale, bright rays were streaming, cold as white fires, unearthly as the arrows of the fabled moon goddess. And like arrows, too, they flamed swiftly through the air, seeking and finding their marks. And one by one, Mulric's men stiffened and stood frozen. The last was the Baron himself, and then the fires of the talisman died and were gone. "Delphia!" Rayner cried. The girl was already running toward him, down the length of the hall. "This is sorcery, Prince," Eblik said. "And it is evil." "It aids us at least," Rayner flung at him, and then turned to meet the girl. And halted, staring. A sudden icy chill had dropped down upon the great hall. The lamps dimmed swiftly and faded into utter darkness. Through the midnight black, Rayner heard Delphia scream. He sprang forward cursing. His foot struck a prostrate body. He bent and searching fingers found a man's bearded chin. "Delphia!" he shouted. "Rayner!" she called, and her voice seemed to fade and dwindle as though from infinite distances. "Rayner, help me!" The prince's sword screamed through the dark. He stumbled forward blindly, seeking to penetrate the jet blackness, and quite suddenly one hand gripped hard, leathery flesh. He heard an angry voice. "Thou meddling fool! You dare to lift steel against the Lord of the Zodiac." The voice of Gyar. "Gyar, the warlock, come now to Mulric's castle by some evil sorcery. Lift steel?" Rayner questioned furiously. "I'll give you a taste of it, skulking wizard." He thrust strongly, just as Gyar pulled free. A pain-filled screech rang out, but Rayner had lost the wizard in the darkness, and he pushed forward hurriedly before the oldster could escape. "Thou fool!" Gyar's voice whispered, cold with bitter menace. "Blind, rash fool." Rayner, groping in the dark, paused suddenly. A strange, greenish glow was beginning to pervade the hall. But its eerie light gave no illumination. Rather, it served only to reveal the source from which it sprang. A gross and hideous bulk, scaled and shining, loomed above the man. It was shaped like a dragon, and Rayner suddenly remembered the symbol that he had seen on the talisman. The sign of the basilisk. Only instinct saved the prince then. He knew with a dreadful certainty that to meet the dreadful gaze of the horror would mean death. And before he had time to catch but a flashing glimpse of the basilisk, Rayner whirled, both hands lifted to his eyes. Through them, darting into the secret fortress of his mind, an icy chill had leaped suddenly. A cold beyond cold, a horror beyond life. 4 strides he took, blinded, his head throbbing with agony. Something soft and heavy caught his foot, and Rayner stumbled and crashed down upon the stones. The world went out in a blanket of merciful oblivion. 3-3, the sign of the black flower, Rayner awoke suddenly. Sunlight was slanting down through the high oaks, and a gruff voice was cursing steadily in several outlandish dialects of Gobi. The prince realized that he was being carried on someone's back, and recognized the deep voice as Eblik's. He wriggled free, dropped to the ground, and the Nubian turned swiftly, his ugly face twisted with delight. "Shaitan," he growled, "let gods be praised. So you are alive, eh?" "Just about," Rayner said wryly. "What's happened?" "How should I know? When the lights went out back in Mauric's castle, I blundered out of the hall in the dark, and when I got back, Delphia was gone, and you were lying on your face with a bump as large as World Mountain on your head. So I picked you up and headed east." "Why east?" Rayner asked. "You have my thanks, but it might have been better to have remained in the castle, Delphia." "She's to the east," Eblik grunted. "At least, our best chance is to go in that direction. I picked up one of Mauric's men and brought him with us. He woke up an hour ago, and I choked some information from the dog. Giar has a citadel in Mirac Forest, in that direction." He nodded toward the rising sun. "You were cursing the warlock in your sleep, so I guessed a little of what had happened. What now?" "We go to Giar's citadel," Rayner decided. "You did well, Ibalik." Swiftly he explained what had happened. "Where are our horses?" "Shaitan knows. They took fright and ran off. It isn't far, however, so—" "Well, I am beginning to understand now. Eblik Giar used me as a cat's paw, though just how I still cannot understand," Rayner pondered. No doubt Giar had abducted the girl, but why had not the warlock stolen her by means of his magic, without seeking Rayner's aid? Could it be that the wizard had been unable to enter Mauric's castle until someone had opened a gateway for him? The prince had heard of such beings, creatures that could not enter a house unless they were lifted across the threshold, alien things that could never cross running water. Perhaps the amulet itself had given Giar power to materialize in the castle. Minded of the talisman, Rayner fumbled in his belt and found the disc there. He examined it with renewed curiosity. In the black jewel, the star point glowed with pale brilliance. "Well, we go east then," Rayner decided. "Come." Without further words, he set off at a steady, effortless lope that ate up the miles. The giant Nubian paced him easily, swinging his great axe as though in anticipation. The oak forest stretched far and far beyond their horizon. Overhead, the sun grew hotter, pouring down its rays that would still be blasting upon Gobi when the empire would be not even a memory in the minds of men. But at last, hours later, the trees thinned, and the 2 men found themselves at the top of a long slope that stretched down to the dark waters of a lake. In the lake's center was an islet, and on the islet, Giar's citadel, a citadel of darkness. Blacker than the nighted Gulf of Abaddon was the great block of shining stone that towered up to the sky, a single gigantic, polished oblong of jet, with neither tower nor window to break its grim monotony. No bridge spanned the lake. The waters were steel grey, frigid as polar seas they seemed. On the islet, about the citadel, the ground was carpeted with darkness. The nature of this shadowy stain was a riddle. It was not stone, for now and again a long ripple would shudder across it as the wind sighed past. The citadel lay in the shelter of a valley, and over all seemed to hang a slumbrous, eerie quiet. No sound stirred, save for the wind's occasional murmuring. And even that was oddly hushed. Thus might sleep the fabled Elysian fields, where the dead who have tasted Lethe wander to and fro, with a half-incurious yearning for lost delights, amid the eternal hush of the Shadowland. With a little shiver, Raynor shook off the spell. He strode forward, the Nubian at his side. Eblik said nothing, but his keen barbaric senses guessed that sorcery dwelt in this valley. The black's eyes were distended. His nostrils twitched, as though seeking to scent something that dwelt beyond the threshold of his realization. As the two went down the slope, a dim, unreal perfume seemed to rise and drift about them. An odor sensed rather than actually scented. And a drowsy languor made Raynor's eyes heavy. Truly dark magic guarded Giar's citadel. They reached the lake's shore. They circled swiftly and discovered there was no means of crossing to the islet. "Short of building a raft," Raynor observed, "which would take too long, I see nothing to it but a swim." "Aye," Eblik assented, readily enough, but his somber eyes dwelt on the motionless grey waters. "Yet it would be well to have our blades ready, Prince." A dagger hung at Raynor's side. He unsheathed this and gripped it between his teeth. Without a word he dived into the lake, came up yards away, swimming strongly, and the water was cold. Cold. Frigid beyond anything Raynor had ever known. The dreadful chill of it lanced deep into his bones, making them grind together with the sheer pain of the unearthly cold. Looking down, he found that the water was opaque. A uniform dull grayness made it seem as though he was floating on clouds. What mystery might lurk in these hidden depths he could not guess, but at least nothing rose to halt his progress. The lake was not wide, yet Raynor was curiously exhausted when at last he waded through shallows and on to dry land. Eblik was not far behind now. Not far away, Giar's citadel rose blackly cryptic before them, and at their feet were the black flowers. The ground could not be seen, so thickly they grew. A living carpet of velvety darkness they covered the islet, weirdly beautiful, with stems and leaves and soft petals, all of the same glossy black. Ever and anon a soft wind whispered past, and waves rippled across the jet sea. Save for the wind, it was utterly silent. The two men moved forward, the flowers brushed against their ankles, and a soft cloud of disturbed pollen hung like smoke in their wake. And ever the insidious perfume crept into their nostrils, stronger now, vaguely repellent and redolent of unknown and forbidden things. His gaze riveted on the citadel, Raynor did not at first realize that he was making little progress. Then he glanced down quickly, or tried to. But his muscles seemed to respond with unwillingness, and it was with a genuine effort that he succeeded in looking down. The black flowers seemed to be swaying toward him. Around his feet, the smoky darkness hung. The dim haze fingered up, questing. Raynor tried to spring forward. His feet kicked up a great cloud of pollen, and it shrouded him like a pall. He was unconscious of the fact that he had halted and was swaying to and fro. Slowly over his vision, a dim curtain dropped. He seemed to fall very slowly. The black flowers leaned toward him hungrily. A velvet blossom brushed his cheek. Another seemed to cup his mouth as though in dreadful simulacrum of a kiss. Raynor breathed the dark perfume of the flower's heart. Of a sudden veils were lifted, and he saw unimaginable things. A blaze of sound and light and color swirled into being. Trumpets shrilled in his ears, and he heard the thunder of high walls crumbling to ruin. Confused visions of the past came to Raynor. and he lived again dimly as in a dream, things he remembered and things he had forgotten. And always the strange, deadly perfume was strong in his nostrils, but he felt no urge to move. The soporific spell of the Lethean flowers held him bound in fetters of dark magic. It was pleasant to lie here, to rest and to remember. Then a rough hand gripped Rayner's arm. He was lifted and immediately fell again heavily. From an immense distance came a harsh, despairing cry, the voice of Ebelik. The sound pierced through the mists that shrouded Prince Rayner's brain. The Nubian was in danger, had cried to his master for help. Realization of this gave the prince strength as he battled down the terrible urge to remain motionless, to sleep. And at last, Rayner won. The effort left him sweating and exhausted, but abruptly the visions faded and were gone. He looked upon Gyar's citadel and the haunted islet in the lake. With a sobbing curse, he staggered upright. At his feet lay the unconscious Nubian, and Rayner lifted the black to his shoulders. Then, holding his breath, he plunged forward across the dark sea. Even at that moment of mad turmoil, feeling an odd sense of sadness at the thought of the jet velvety beauty he crushed underfoot. A wind rippled the blooms. They seemed to sigh as in farewell. The sign of the black flower was conquered. 4. The sign of the serpent. Now Gyar's citadel loomed above them. Grimly enigmatic, it towered there featureless, with no gate or window breaking the dull monotony of its gloomy structure. Sick and dizzy, Rayner plunged on, and quite suddenly he realized that he had been wrong. A portal gaped in the high wall just before him. Had it previously escaped his searching gaze, perhaps? It was more probable that a hidden door had slid silently aside to admit the interlopers. It was not a comforting thought, for it meant that eyes were invisibly watching Rayner, eyes of the warlock Gyar. Nevertheless, the prince sprang over the threshold. Instantly the portal shut behind him. With little hope, Rayner turned and attempted to reopen the door, but he failed. Even if he had succeeded, what then? His path lay into the heart of the citadel, and a dimly lighted passageway stretched, slanting down before him. Smiling grimly, Rayner moved on, carrying the unconscious Ebelik, who now, however, began to stir and twitch feebly. In a moment, the giant Nubian had regained his senses. With one cat-like movement he leaped free, the huge war-axe gripped in his hand. Then, seeing no enemy, he relaxed, grinning somewhat feebly at Rayner. "We're in the citadel?" he asked. "Shaitan, there is magic in those damned flowers." "Sorcery of the pit." "Keep your voice down," Rayner said. "Gyar may have ways of hearing us, and watching us too, but we can't turn back now. And anyway, I want to try my sword on Gyar's ugly neck." "I am curious to see if necromancy will armor him against this," said Ebelik, with a flash of white teeth, and the axe cleft the air in a deadly blow. The Nubian handled the heavy weapon as though it were light as a javelin. Warily the two continued along the corridor. The dim light came from no discernible source. It seemed to gleam faintly from the air all about them. The walls and roof and floor were of the same dark stone. The passage dipped, widened. The two men came out on a little ledge overhanging an abyss. At their feet was a gulf, dropping straight down to a milky, luminous shining far beneath. Nor was it water that lay at the pit's bottom, though it was certainly liquid. It glowed with a wan, eerie light that reflected palely upon the black room. Arching above here, the corridor broadened into a circular cavern. A bridge spanned the abyss. It arched from the ledge's lip, straight and unbroken as Bifrost Bridge, that Norsemen say, reaches to Valhalla's gate. It stretched to a black wall of rock and ended beneath an arched opening in the stone. "Our path lies there," Rayner said grimly. "Pray to your Nubian gods, Ebelik." The prince stepped forward upon the perilous bridge. It was narrow, terribly so. Giddy vertigo clutched at the man's brain, impelling him to look down. He fought against the dangerous impulse, kept his eyes steadily upon his goal. He felt Eblik's hand grip his shoulder, heard the Nubian gasps. "It draws me! Guide me, Prince! I dare not keep my eyes open. Hold fast!" Rayner said between clenched teeth. Yet he looked down. He could not help it. Torzia clutched him far below. In the milky, slime-dark bodies moved slowly, writhing and squirming in the dimness. What they were, Rayner could not tell, but the creatures had a sickeningly human aspect, despite their ambiguous outlines. A blind, deformed face stared up. A shocking muzzle gaped, but no sound came. The things squirmed and flopped their way through the pale liquid, and Rayner knew that his hasty glance down had been an error. He felt stronger than ever the weird compulsion that seemed to tug at him, drawing him, overbalancing him so that he swayed perilously on the giddy bridge. With a grinding effort, he looked again at the bridge's end. Through some secret reservoir of mind, he drew strength and will. He stepped forward slowly, carefully, but he could not banish the thought of the horrors that dwelt below. Yet at last the two men reached their goal. Sweating and gasping, they stepped to solid footing, and before them the portal in the rock opened enigmatically. "God," Eblik groaned, "must we cross that hell bridge on our return? If we do return." But Rayner had crossed the threshold and was standing silent before the snake. He was in a small cave, high-roofed, dimly lit, and containing nothing but a crude throne of rock directly facing him. On the throne sat a thing that bore a vague resemblance to a man staring at it. Rayner was reminded of the creatures he had just seen in the abyss. Black and hideous and deformed it towered there, a pulpy, shapeless thing of darkness, less human than a crudely chiseled idol. The head was worst of all. It was flattened, snake-like, with bulging, dull eyes that stared blindly. The lower part of the face was elongated into a muzzle, and the creature was entirely covered with scales. It sat there motionless, and bound about its brow like a dreadful crown was a snake. Its flattened head was lifted, as in the uraeus crown of the pharaohs, and its wise, ancient gaze dwelt coldly upon Rayner. He had never seen anything as lovely and as horrible as this serpent. The scintillant colors in its body flickered, changed, fading as smoke fades from red to violet, emerald green, shining topaz, sun yellow, all in an intricate design that also shifted and moved strangely. The blinding beauty of the snake struck through Rayner like a sword. Its eyes held him. Very horrible were those eyes, alien beyond all imagining. Their gaze was at first tender, almost caressing, like that of a well-loved maiden. Strange magic reached out to grip the man. The eyes of the snake probed into his soul. He felt nothing, heard nothing, saw nothing but the flood of alien sorcery pouring into his mind from the incredibly ancient eyes of the serpent. He was unconscious of the fact that Eblik had halted behind him, motionless, paralyzed, and those passionless bright eyes were not evil, no. They were older than evil. Beyond it, above it, as a god is above human motives and ideals, they spoke of a wisdom beyond earthly understanding. They erased all else from Rayner's consciousness, the cords that bound him to this earth. The human ties slipped away slowly. He had not lost his memories of warm hearths, of laughing, fire-lit faces, of sword-play, and of the mad, high excitement of war. He remembered these things with a distant, diamond-sharp clarity, but they had lost their significance. They were unimportant. They would pass and be enveloped in the shadow of the ultimate night, and in the end they would not matter. He remembered Eblik, the Nubian. The pale, proud face of Delphia rose up before him, but he felt no warmth of human kinship or understanding. All these things were slipping away from him in a clear, cold wisdom that came from beyond the stars. He envisioned man as a bit of animate clay, moving for a little while upon a ball of mud and stone and water that drifted through the void, through the darkness that would finally engulf it. So the snake, that ancient one, gave to Rayner its vision, and the serpent uncoiled from the brow of the seated thing, and it slid down and glided across the stones to the prince, and it coiled about his body with a chill and merciless grip. The wise, flattened head lifted, till it was on a level with the man's face. The eyes of the serpent reached into Rayner's brain, into the secret fortress of his soul, and the prince stepped back one pace. Then another. Slowly, like an automaton, he moved back toward the abyss that gaped behind him. He passed Eblik without seeing the black. For nothing existed but the dark, alien gaze of the serpent, brooding and old, old beyond earth's life. The pit yawned behind him. Some stirring of human consciousness gave Rayner pause. He stopped, his sluggish thoughts feebly trying to rise free from the frigid ocean that held them motionless. Dimly he heard a cry from Eblik, muffled, faint, scarcely more than a despairing groan, and that cry again saved him. Rayner could not have saved himself, but he knew that the Nubian called to his master for aid, and the thought of that was a faint, hot flame that rose and waxed brighter and slowly burned away the chill darkness that darkened his mind. Slowly, slowly indeed did the prince battle his way back to life. He swayed there upon the edge of the great gulf, while the serpent watched, and Eblik, after that one moan, was silent. And at last Rayner one tide of life surged through his blood. He uttered a hoarse shout, gripped the cold, muscular body of the serpent, dragged it from his body. He flung the snake from him into the abyss. A far sighing drifted up, unearthly distant. With that the spell lifted. Rayner came back to consciousness. No longer bound by the dark fetters of primeval magic, he swayed and leaped away from the edge of the pit. He gave an inarticulate cry, somehow triumphant, exulting, for the sign of the serpent was vanquished. 5. The sign of the fish of Ea, a movement caught Rayner's attention. The hideous image on the throne was moving slightly. Its misshapen black hand lifted. The muzzle gaped and shuddered. From the deformed mouth came a voice, deep as though it burst from the tongue of a corpse. Harsh, half inarticulate, and muffled, it croaked, "Mercy, in your mercy, slay me." The dull eyes looked upon Rayner. Shrinking a little in revulsion, the prince, almost by instinct, whipped out his sword. The monster slowly lifted its frightful head. "Slay me! Slay me!" "By all the gods," Rayner whispered through white lips, "what manner of being are you?" "Once human, like you," the harsh voice groaned. "Once I ruled this citadel. Once I was a greater sorcerer than Giar." A black paw beat the throne's side in agony. "Gar served me. I taught him the dark law, and he turned to evil and overthrew me and prisoned me here. He set the serpent to guard me. From my lips even now he learns wisdom. I serve him in ways I may not tell you. My soul rose between the stars to bring him knowledge." Rayner forced himself to speak. "Know you aught of a girl, a captive of Gar's?" "Aye." "Aye, the warlock has need of a maiden once in a decade, thus he renews his youth. Giar is old. Death should have taken him centuries ago, but by the young blood of a maiden, and by her young soul he drinks fresh vigor. He gains strength to work new evil. Follow this road, and you will find the girl." Rayner made an impulsive gesture. But the horrible voice froze him in mid-stride. "Hold! You have conquered the snake, yet I am still captive, still in agony you cannot imagine. Give me release, I pray you, slay me!" Rayner dared not look upon the hideous figure. "You seek death. I should have died centuries ago. Free me now, and I shall aid you when you need aid most. Slay me." Rayner's lips tightened in resolution. He stepped forward, lifted his sword as the blade swept down. The monster croaked. Remember, the sign of Tammuz is Lord of the Zodiac. It is the master sign. Steele put a period to the words. The horror's head leaped from its shoulders. A foul-smelling ichor spurted a foot into the air. The creature toppled to lie motionless on the stones. Blood, shaitan, Rayner muttered shakily. I think we've walked into hell itself. Those be true words, said a low voice. Once again you have saved us, master. But for what? Some worse doom, I think. Eblik was rubbing his head, shivering. The prince gave a bark of laughter that held no mirth. Well, our road is open before us, and a brave man goes to meet his doom instead of waiting for it to creep up on him. Hold fast to your axe, Eblik. Rayner skirted the throne and entered a passage that gaped in the wall behind it. Once more, the way led downward. It was a monotonous journey between dull walls of black stone. What had the monster on the throne meant the sign of Tammuz is Lord of the Zodiac, the master sign that could not be drawn, the sign of which the jet jewel in Gear's amulet was the symbol. The passage turned and twisted, but always descended. They were far beneath ground level now, Rayner thought. His leg muscles were beginning to ache when at last the way was barred by a door of iron. It was, however, unfastened and moved aside at Rayner's cautious push. He looked into a great circular room. One green light illuminated it dimly. The floor was of mosaic, figured in a bizarre design that centered in the signs of the zodiac. A golden archer and a blue fish, a scarlet serpent and a black flower, the basilisk all in shining green, and the disk of the mirror in dull steel gray. In the exact center of the room was an immense jewel of jet set into the mosaic. A blindingly bright star point glittered deep in the gem's heart. It was frigidly cold. Looking up, Rayner realized why the room was roofless. Its shaft probed up through the heart of the huge stone structure, a hollow tube that ended far above in a purple-black sky shot with innumerable stars. The day had ended, and moonless night brooded over the warlock's citadel. The stars looked down upon the signs of the zodiac. The walls were hung with curtains of white samite. They parted now, and a slim figure entered. It was Delphia. She moved slowly, her gaze staring blindly before her, the coils of midnight hair clustering about the pale, keen face. 3 paces she took, and halted. Delphia, Rayner called, and stepped forward. The girl did not move. She lifted her head, gazed up at the stars. There was a queer avidity in her face, a tenseness as though she waited eagerly for something. It was utterly silent and cold. Cold, Rayner gripped Delphia's arm, shook her roughly. Wake up, he said urgently. Are you under a spell? She has enchantment on her. Eblik grunted, peering into the girl's eyes. Let me carry her, Prince. Once we're out of this evil place, she may awaken. Rayner hesitated. Before he could speak, a new voice came, softly, mocking. Nay, let me carry the wench. I shall be gentle. With an oath, Rayner whipped around, his sword bared. Eblik's war-axe was suddenly in his hand, quivering like a falcon, straining to be released. There, filling the passage by which they had entered, were a dozen men, fierce-eyed, grinning with hate and triumph, the outlaws of Mirac Forest. At their head stood Baron Malric. His youthful face wore a gay, reckless smile, despite the fact that he was in the heart of the wizard's stronghold. Hold! He whispered, do not move, for if you do, I shall slay you. And one slim hand slipped toward the loose velvet sleeve and the sharp knife Malric wore strapped to his forearm. How the devil did you get here? Rayner snarled. I followed the path you opened for me. I swam the lake and crossed the field of the black flowers. I tracked you here through the citadel. It was not an easily won victory, No. Of all my men, these few are all that remain. Some sleep amid the black flowers, others died elsewhere. But it does not matter. Gyar was too reckless when he hired you to steal the girl from my castle. Warlock he may be, but I rule Miraak. Hired me. Rayna said slowly. You mistake. Gyar is my enemy, as he is yours. Malrik laughed softly. Well, it does not matter whether you lie or tell truth. For you and this black shall both die here, and after I have found and slain Gyar, I shall go back to my castle with the Wen, after you have slain Gyar. The words whispered out, the Samite curtains parted, and a man stepped through. It was the Warlock. The dim green light touched the great billow of white beard, the shaggy eyebrows of the giant. The dark, somber eyes held no emotion. You seek me, Malrik. I am here. Slay me if you can. The Baron, after a single start, stood motionless. His gaze locked in a silent, deadly duel with the cold stare of the wizard. Abruptly, without warning, Malrik moved. Too fast for eye to follow, his hand dipped, came up flashing, brought death. Steel flickered through the air. The keen knife drove at Gyar's throat and fell blunted, ringing on the stones. Mortal fool, the Warlock whispered. You seek to battle the stars in their courses. Malrik, I am Lord of the Zodiac. I have power over the signs that rule men's lives. The Baron moistened his lips. His smile was crooked. Is this so? I know something of the Zodiac, Gyar, and I know you do not rule all the signs. You yourself once spoke to me of being born under the sign of the Fish of Ea. As was I, how can you rule your ruler, or any other sign? Nor are you Lord of the Stars. There is a certain sign, Malrik glanced at the great black jewel in the mosaic's center. There is Tammuz. He is Lord of the Master Sign. Who can call on Tammuz? Gyar said coldly. Once in 1,000 years is a man born under his sign, and only such a man may work the ultimate magic. I said to you, I was born under the sign of the Fish of Ea, but who are you that I should tell you full truth, as I do now? The Warlock frowned at Rayna. As for you and your servant, you shall die with the others. Had you been wise, you would not have sought me here. This girl is mine. I need her life to give me renewed youth. Do you think I fear a wizard? Rayna snapped and sprang, his sword sheared down, screaming through cleft air. And rebounded, clashing. The weapon dropped from Rayna's nerveless hand, which was paralyzed as though by a strong electric shock. Snarling an oath, the prince tensed to leap, ready to close with the Warlock with bare hands. Gar's peremptory gesture halted him. Rash fools, the wizard whispered, a chill and dreadful menace in the sibilant words. You shall die as no man has died for 1,000 years. His arms lifted in a strange, archaic gesture. A gesture that reached up toward the stars far above. A gesture that summoned. Bleak and ominous came the Warlock's voice. Your doom comes. For now I call on the sign of the Fish of Ea. 6. The sign of Tammuz. The green light thickened and grew fainter. An eerie, cloudy emerald glow dropped down upon the roofless room. The figure of Gyar was a dark shadow towering in the dimness. And the deep voice thundered out, Ea, Lord of Eridu and Apsi, dweller in the house of the watery deep, Shar Apsi. By the power of thy sign I call on the Lord of that which is below, Watcher of Aralu, home of the restless dead. Ea, troubler of the great waters, consort of Damkina, Damgal Nuna, rise now from the eternal abyss. The green darkness thickened. Rayna, straining his eyes, could see nothing. He made an effort to move, but found he could not. A weird paralysis held him helpless. He heard a sound, faint and far away, the sound of waters, the tinkling of brooks, the rushing of mighty cataracts, the thunder of tides crashing on basalt cliffs. The noises of the great deep heralded the coming of Ea, Lord of the waters under the earth. Nothing existed but the glowing emerald fogs. A deeper light began to grow above. The mists poured up toward it. Thicker they grew, and thicker they swirled into an inverted whirlpool rushing up toward the bright green, shining in the air, flooding into it, vanishing. Vanishing as though plunging into an abyss that had no bottom. A figure swam slowly into view, stiff and rigid. One of Baron Malric's wolves. Rayner had a glimpse of a strained, agonized face, and then the man was caught up into the torrent and vanished into the emerald glow. A thin, high scream drifted faintly from afar. There were others after that. One by one, the outlaws were caught up by the tide of alien magic, drawn into the weird whirlpool, swirled into nothingness. All were gone at last, save for Malric now. The Baron came into view. His youthful face was expressionless, but in the wide eyes was a horror beyond life. The bright hair tossed as though the man floated through water. No sound came from Malric. He drifted up and vanished. The tide gripped Rayner. He felt himself lifted, weightless, felt himself circling, rising. The shining abyss loomed above him. Desperately he fought to escape from the necromantic spell, quite. Suddenly the green mists were blotted out. Rayner seemed to hang in a black, starless immensity. He was alone in the void of eternal night. In the distance, a white, chill light began to grow. It approached, meteor-like, and Rayner saw a round, oddly familiar object speeding toward him. Soon it hung in the void not far away, and the prince remembered the deformed monster that had sat on the throne above the abyss, the captive of the snake that he had slain. Here was the same misshapen, hideous head, with its glazed eyes and elongated muzzle, all covered with glittering scales. The thing spoke. "My promise, Prince Rayner. You gave me release, and I promised aid when you should need it most. I bring that aid now, the amulet," said the monstrous disembodied head. Abruptly, Rayner remembered the talisman Giar had given him in Mirac Forest, the disc that bore the signs of the zodiac on its surface. He did not seem to move, yet the amulet was in his hand and lifted high. It had changed. The signs were erased, all but the black jewel in its center. Within the gem the star point pulsed and waned with supernal brilliance. "Tammuz is lord of the zodiac," the hideous muzzle croaked. "His magic is above magic. He is master of truth. Through him you may cast away the fetters of glamour and sorcery. Once in 1,000 years is a man born under this sign, and only such a man may call on Tammuz. I am that man. I was born under the master sign. Giar lies. He boasts of that which he is not, and now, to keep my promise and to aid you, I summon the Lord of the Zodiac. I summon Tammuz Dawn." Forthwith the black jewel blazed with an icy, incredible light, starkly pitiless and blindingly bright, and the fantastic visions snapped out and vanished. The talisman was snatched from Rayner's hand. He felt firm stone beneath his feet. A cold wind blew on his sweating face. Once more he was in Giar's citadel. He stood in the roofless room of the Zodiac, but no longer was it filled with the green mists. Delphia and Eblik stood motionless. Near them towered the warlock. Of Malric and his wolves there was no trace. Giar's beard fluttered in the frigid blast. His deep eyes were hate-filled. And, with a queer, strange certainty, Rayner knew that by the sign and the power of the real Tammuz, all magic had been stripped from the wizard. No longer master of dark sorcery, Giar was human, vulnerable. Raynor's shout was madly exultant as he sprang. The armor of invulnerability had been torn from Giar, but inhuman strength still surged in the giant frame. Huge muscles rode under the coarse robe, Scar swept out his arm in a bone-crushing blow. The shock of it made Rayner reel. Shaking his head blindly, he reeled in and closed with the warlock. The two men crashed down on the stones. Gyar fell uppermost, his fingers stabbed down at Rayner's eyes. The prince rolled his head aside, and the warlock bellowed with pain as his hand smashed against rock. Abruptly Gyar thrust himself away, and his mighty body dropped upon Rayner with an impact that drove the breath from the smaller man's lungs. Weakly, the prince drove a blow at the wizard's face. Blood spurted, staining the white beard, roaring. Gyar's hands fastened on Rayner's throat. They tightened remorselessly. The prince rolled aside. He caught Gyar's body between his legs, locking his feet together. Breath spewed from the warlock's lips in a foul gust. Gyar bared his teeth in a murderous grin, and his fingers tightened. A hot, throbbing agony was in Rayner's skull. He could not breathe. Knife-like pain thrust into his spine. A little more pressure, and his backbone would crack. Sheer blind madness swept down on the prince then. Like a flood of red waters it poured through him, sweeping away all else but an insane lust to kill, and swiftly. Raynor's thigh muscles bulged, holding Gyar's body in a vice between them. The grinding strain of that frightful effort made sweat burst out on the prince's face, yet he knew that this was the crucial time. It was kill or be slain. Bones cracked and gave sickeningly. There was a sudden softness in the wizard's body. Gyar gave a frightful howling shriek that seemed to burst up from the depths of his lungs. Blood spewed from the gaping mouth, frost over the white beard, fell on Rayner. The mighty hands released their grip on the prince's throat. Gyar sprang up in one last convulsive effort. Dying? He thrust up his arms to the cold stars and screamed like a beast, and he fell, as a tree falls, smashing down on the stones. He lay inert. From him blood crept darkly across the mosaic, touching and then covering the sign of the Fish of Ea, the sign under which Gyar had been born and had ruled. The warlock was dead. Consciousness left Rayner then. Merciful darkness blanketed him. Nor did he recover until he felt water poured between his lips, felt a cool, soft hand on his brow. He opened his eyes. Above him sunlight slanted between the branches of an oak. The green, warm daylight of Miraak Forest was all about him. And Delphia knelt at his side, her eyes no longer blinded with sorcery, her face clouded with anxiety. "Rayner," she said gratefully, "you are alive. Thank the gods." "Alive?" growled Eblik, coming from behind an oak. "I'd not have carried him here if he hadn't been. How do you feel, Prince?" "Well enough," Rayner said. "My legs ache like fire, but I am unharmed, I think." "You carried me out of the citadel, Eblik." "That he did." Delphia nodded. "And swam the lake with you. The black flowers were dead." Rayner blasted as though by lightning. "If you can walk, we'd best be moving," Eblik said impatiently. Rayner stood up, wincing slightly. "True, we'll find horses and leave this accursed forest behind us." Together he and Delphia set out along the winding path that led through Miraak. Eblik hesitated a moment before he followed. He looked up at the blue, cloudless sky. "May the gods grant we get out of this wilderness before nightfall," he grunted. "Out of this black forest, and in another land, a land where the stars are less evil." Gripping his war axe, he hurried after Delphia and Rayner. And presently, the three of them were swallowed by the cool, dim aisles of the vast forest. End of The Citadel of Darkness by Henry Kuttner. If you found this story interesting, take a moment to support the channel, hit subscribe, click the bell icon so you're notified of new stories, leave a comment, and give the video a thumbs up. Share it on your socials if you think others might enjoy pulp horror. And if you'd like to go a step further in reviving these forgotten horrors, you can click the Super Thanks button below or become a member of the channel. With your support, these dusty old stories may see the light once more.